Okay, I'll call to order this hearing of September 25th, 2025 for the uh, county case file Z0885-25 and Z0313-25, request for conditional use and other approval from PGE regarding the Stafford Road power line corridor. My name is Joe Turner. I am the county's hearings officer. My role as the hearings officer is to conduct public hearings and make decisions about certain land use matters in Clackamas County. I skipped a section there. Sorry about that. I start by saying I'm not a county employee. I'm licensed as an attorney and trained as a planner. I serve under contract to the Board of Commissioners. And as I started to say, my role as the hearings officer is to conduct hearings and make decisions about certain land use matters in Clackamas County. In making those decisions, I'm required to apply the county's existing laws. I'm not a policymaker. I don't have the authority to vary from or change the laws. If you think that the laws need to be changed, you can work with Planning Commission and Board of Commissioners to do that. But state law requires that this application be judged based on the laws in effect when the application was filed. As a hearings officer, I'm to provide an unbiased decision maker. I believe I am unbiased with regard to this application. I have not had any pre-hearing contact with any of the parties regarding the substance of the application, and I don't have any interest in the subject property or any of the surrounding properties. But anyone has the right to challenge my impartiality, to argue that I'm biased in one way or another, and you can do that when it's your opportunity to testify. Procedure will follow. I'll start by asking staff to summarize their staff report, copies of which are available on the county's website. Then the applicant will have the opportunity to present their proposal and respond to the staff report. And then anyone else who wants to testify about this application in support, in opposition, or with questions or concerns may do so. Once everyone has had an initial opportunity to testify, I will give staff and the applicant alone the opportunity to respond to the testimony that was offered. If those responses include any new evidence, I will give everyone a chance to respond to the new evidence. Otherwise, I'll close the public portion of the hearing without taking additional public testimony. Given the number of people that are interested in this application, I am going to limit testimony for the applicant gets 40 minutes for their initial presentation and response. You can split it between the two. Mr. Hathaway, the attorney for the Stafford Road opponents, requested 15 minutes because I'm going to grant that because he is representing a group, multiple issues for that group. Everyone else will be limited to 3 minutes. The county will be running a timer, which should be visible on the screen. However, even within those 3 minutes, those time limits, please don't repeat testimony offered by yourself or earlier witnesses. Repeating your testimony doesn't make your case any stronger. This isn't a popularity contest, so whether everybody loves it or everybody hates it is not an issue I get to consider. The only issue before me is whether the application does or does not comply with the applicable approval criteria. However, anyone with an interest in this application may offer relevant oral or written testimony. But again, testimony must be relevant to the applicable approval criteria. However, it's important that all parties make their best case to me. My decisions are final for purposes of the county, but may be appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals, or LUBA. But LUBA generally will not allow new testimony and evidence on appeal. They'll decide any appeal based on the record before me. So if you feel it's important that myself or any future decision maker know something about this application, you need to make sure it gets into the record before me. In order to preserve your right to appeal, you or someone expressly representing you must testify orally or in writing before the close of the record. And in order to raise an issue on appeal, someone must have raised that issue before me with enough specificity that people can understand what the issue is. If the applicant wants to object to any conditions of approval on constitutional grounds, they must raise those issues before me as well. If you feel you need more time to prepare, you can ask me to hold the record open or continue the hearing. If I hold the record open, you'll have an opportunity to submit additional written testimony and evidence before I make a decision. If I continue the hearing, we'll come back and do this again at a later date. However, state law requires that I hold the record open for an additional week for the applicant alone to submit a final written argument without any new evidence. But if anybody else wants me to hold the record open for any other purpose or to continue the hearing, you must make that request before the close of the hearing today during your testimony. Also, my decisions must comply with state law that requires that I issue a final written decision in this case within 150 days after the application was filed. So there's some limit to how long I can continue the hearing or hold the record open. When you testify, please begin by stating your name and your full mailing address. Please spell your last name so I get it right, although many people's full names appear on my screen. Some are just first names or other identifiers. So please give me your name and spell your last name. But that concludes my introduction. Ms. Fields, you want to start us out?
This public hearing will be conducted virtually using the Zoom platform. Panelists for today's hearing, which include the hearings officer, county staff, and the applicant, have both audio and video capability. Audience members who have joined the meeting will have their mics muted unless they wish to testify, in which case they will be called upon to do so by the county staff moderator. Audience members' video will not be turned on at any time. Today's hearing is being recorded as required by law. The county will make every effort to post the record on the county website later today. There is a designated time during the hearing when it will be open for testimony. The hearings officer will make it clear when this is. If you want to provide testimony, you will utilize the raise hand feature. Attendees on PC and iPad, you have a raise hand button on the Zoom bar, which will be either at the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on your device. When the moderator switches you over to provide testimony, your screen will look different for a little while. Primarily, you will see the participants' cameras, not just the one who is speaking. Staff will call upon you when it is time for you to provide testimony. Be sure to provide your name and mailing address when you begin. Once you have provided your testimony, your mic will be muted and your screen will be returned to normal. If the record is left open at the end of the hearing and you wish to submit additional written testimony, email the written testimony to myself, Joy Fields, at jfields@clackamas.us, or mail it to the Clackamas County Planning and Zoning Division at 150 Beaver Creek Road, Oregon City, Oregon 97045. If you mail it, please include the application number in your testimony so that we can attach it to the correct file. The staff contact email address is also available on the website where you found the Zoom link for today's hearing. Testimony must be received by 4 p.m. on the day the record closes. People who testify and provide their mailing address will receive a copy of the hearings officer's written decision. If you do not wish to testify but would like to receive the decision, you must provide your email or standard mailing address by either sending it to myself through email or by entering it into the Zoom chat function during the hearing. For those of you who wish to submit testimony, my email is on the last slide of my staff presentation as well.
Your staff presentation is not on the screen right now.
No, it's not.
Okay.
It will be when you
Okay.
ask me to provide the staff presentation.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so this will be a summary of my staff report. for both file Z0282-25 as well as Z0313-25. The applicant requested that they be reviewed concurrently. And so although Z0313-25 does not require a hearing, because it's being reviewed concurrently, today's hearing encompasses that application as well. Z0313 is a request for a utility facility necessary for public service and the associated transmission lines. That is for 7 poles located at the northernmost extent of the project area. Those 7 poles are located in the exclusive farm use zone and are proposed to be outside of existing road right-of-way. Therefore, they had to be reviewed for land use approval. Other poles in the EFU zoning district that are identified on the map on the screen as gray are located within the road right-of-way, and by state law and the zoning and development ordinance criteria, they do not require review for replacing poles or installing new poles in the road right-of-way in the EFU zone. So the applicants submitted a conditional use application for the replacement of the poles in the RRFF5 Rural Residential Farm and Forest 5-acre zone. As of the staff report, there was a lot of testimony received in opposition, one testimony in support. The opposition was primarily focused on the fact that the project will remove trees, the potential for increased fire hazards, the impacts to wildlife through the removal of the trees and removal of vegetation, the visual and aesthetic impacts that the project will have, health hazards, compliance with the scenic road policies and goals from the comprehensive plan, impact to farmlandia, and the precedent that opponents felt that the project would set. Since the staff report, additional testimony in support of the application has been received from labor groups and others. And we have also received additional information on methods of evaluating visual and aesthetic impacts, as well as presentation materials that you will see today. On the image on the screen, you will see that I have a snippet from an aerial image of Redland Road. That is one of the scenic roads in Clackamas County that currently has transmission lines along it. And staff addressed that in relation to the precedents that people were concerned this project would set. As I mentioned, the Rural Residential Farm and Forest Zone has a footnote in the table of uses that is allowed in the zone that identifies that transmission lines be reviewed as a conditional use. The footnote also says gas lines are reviewed as a conditional use, but today the proposed use that we are considering are the transmission lines. Part of the project currently has transmission lines. However, the proposed use intends to add additional transmission capacity to the existing transmission facilities at the northern end of the project. Staff reviewed the project and the proposed use and found that it complied with 1203. It is identified as a conditional use in the RRFF5 zone. The right-of-way along Stafford Road currently has distribution lines and which is a type of power line that would be converted to transmission lines if this project is approved. The criteria in 1203 related to 1007-07 is for all conditional uses. The use before us today is an unmanned utility facility, which is exempt from 1007.07. I will also note that part of the criteria in ZDO 1203 requires compliance with the sections of the 1000s. However, the table that identifies the applicability of the 1000 sections for different uses has a footnote that identifies utility lines as being exempt from the 1000s. So in that way, the transmission line that is being considered through land use file Z0282-25 is exempt from 1007-07, as well as the other 1000 sections. In addition to complying with the 1000s, ZDO 1203 requires compliance with overlay zones that are found in the 700s. Overlay zones that pertain to this property are the floodplain management zone, as well as the habitat conservation area overlay zone. Those are primarily centered where the project crosses the Tualatin River. However, there is a habitat conservation area south of that as well that goes into the right-of-way in an area where transmission lines are proposed and a pole to hold those transmission lines are proposed. The habitat conservation area exempts the replacement or alteration of existing structures when that replacement or alteration does not disturb more than 500 square feet of area within the habitat conservation area. And so the replacing of poles within the habitat conservation area is not anticipated to disturb more than 500 feet of habitat conservation area, but as noted in the staff report, additional information regarding the impact from replacing poles in the habitat conservation area would be necessary for staff to fully evaluate whether an HCA development permit would be needed. There are no specific sections in the 800s that apply to transmission poles, and so that was not addressed in the staff report. In 1203, it does note that the proposed use has to comply with comprehensive plan goals and policies, as well as the use cannot be found to substantially limit, impair, preclude the use of surrounding properties for primary uses. When staff reviewed the testimony received and the application, the goals and policies that were brought up routinely addressed agricultural policies in support of agriculture in the area, which agriculture as well as rural residential use are both primary uses in the rural residential farm and forest zone. However, the testimony that was concerned with impacts to farmlandia and the commercial events related to agriculture, because the commercial events related to agriculture are not a primary use, it was not tied to whether the proposed use would impair or preclude the primary use of the underlying zone. However, the agricultural policies in the comp plan is a separate criteria that was considered, and the use did not was in compliance with the agricultural policies through this conditional use review, as well as not precluding or impacting the agricultural use. The transportation system policies and goals were addressed primarily through the scenic road policies that were identified as a concern for the community. They were the proposed use traverses the Stafford Road from the Rosemont traffic circle down to Gage Road. However, Stafford Road is identified as a scenic road down to where it comes in and intersects with Mountain Road. Therefore, when we are looking at the project in relation to the policies and goals of the comprehensive plan related to scenic roads, there is only a portion of the project that is subject to the scenic road policies and goals. Evidence provided by opponents of the project seem to indicate that one of the things that made the project not consistent with the policies and goals of the scenic road was the fact that it did not have wide enough shoulders for bicycle or pedestrian facilities, and that it would impede the scenic quality of the area. And so those are addressed in the staff report more fully. As I mentioned, there is habitat conservation area and floodplain. The applicant provided additional maps showing the floodplain related to the poles crossing the Tualatin River, and they are located specifically outside of the floodplain. And so the staff recommended conditions of approval related to floodplain and habitat conservation area could be modified or removed, and the application would still be compliant with the floodplain and habitat conservation area. I say that because the applicant provided proposed revisions to the conditions of approval that are found in Exhibit 44. Staff did recommend approval of this project with conditions of approval, and those conditions of approval with the modifications of that the applicant recommended included that when the poles and transmission lines at the Rosemont substation are no longer used for transmitting electricity, that the exclusive farm use land underneath those poles be returned to farmland. The applicant suggested that the language be revised from providing power to just identifying it as the Rosemont substation, because the Rosemont substation does not actually generate power. The deed restrictions cited in the conditions of approval was applicable to solar facilities as noted by the applicant. So removing that deed restriction is recommended by staff. So removing that condition of approval. The time period for removing vegetation between September and January that staff included as a recommended condition of approval did come from a recommendation from a wildlife biologist that looked at impacts of the proposed project on birds and wildlife, and found that that vegetation period would have the least impact for nesting birds. The applicant identified that if they survey for bird nests outside of September to January, it would have the same impact as limiting vegetation removal to September and January. Staff has no issues with that modification proposed by the applicant. I do want to note that the applicant provided a recommendation that the easements for PGE outside of the right-of-way should not prohibit future construction of bicycle and pedestrian facilities. That is different than how staff recommended wording it. Staff recommended wording it in support of future construction of bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And so that's something for the hearings officer to consider as you're looking at your conditions of approval. And that was aimed at addressing the opponent's concern that the scenic road qualities are not sufficient to provide bicycle and pedestrian facilities in that area. With that, I'll take any questions and I'll leave my contact information up on the screen for those of you wishing to provide additional testimony during the open record period or for those who wish to request a copy of the decision.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. I just had a couple of questions.
Yes.
Where are we on the 150-day clock?
The 150-day clock ends December 27th.
Okay. And excuse me, this may be more a question for the applicant, but I'll throw it out there if you have a response. The opponents argued that the poles are mounted on cement blocks. I didn't know if that was proposed because it's not shown in the photo simulations.
I don't know.
Okay, we'll leave that for the applicant. I just wanted to. And then on page 46 of the staff report, let me find it real quick. Okay. On page 46, you quote Exhibit 4, a letter from one of the opponents, but there's no response to it. I'm wondering why that particular quote was included regarding agritourism and comp plan policy 5H1. It's without a response.
The intent of bringing up agritourism and was on page 46. Was that related to, let me bring up the staff report.
Yeah, it's the very last, almost the last page of the staff report, second to last. It's under
Goals and policies or
00303, goals and policies. Cites Exhibit 4 saying rural tourism policy, quoting the rural tourism policy, but that's all it has is just a quote of what it says.
Okay, I will need to revisit that and see what was
I'll
left
give you a
out.
chance to respond to that after
Perfect, thank you.
in your response. Thank you. The applicant's opportunity to testify. Mr. Schoenenberg or someone else want to start us out for the applicant?
We're just trying to get our audio video here together. If you would just give us 1 second, please.
Okay.
There we go.
I think you've got too many computers on.
Speakers are on now. Can you hear? Is the feedback on now?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, great. I'm going to share my presentation here. 1 moment. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm more used to Teams than Zoom here.
All right. Technology is always a joy.
Yes. Okay. There should be a presentation.
Yep.
Available now. Okay. First of all, I want to thank
Can I get your name first?
Oh, yes, sorry. I'm Jordan Messinger with Portland General Electric. I'm the senior project manager.
You're fading out. We can't barely hear you. I don't know what happened.
Ben, do you want to go? My laptop has an issue periodically. You want to turn on your mic here?
Yeah. I'm gonna turn off your audio. Yes.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Your speakers are muted. Sorry.
And Ms. Renard, can we start a 40-minute timer for the applicant's presentation? That'll be split between your initial and your rebuttal.
There.
Okay, can you hear us now?
Yes.
All right. Sorry about that. We are trying to adapt between two computers here. So, in case you didn't hear me before, my name is Jordan Messinger. I'm a senior project manager with Portland General Electric. I am going to be joined today by Ben Schoenberger from Winterbrook Planning and Will Rasmussen from Miller Nash. I want to start off just by acknowledging all the work and effort in reviewing this application by Ms. Fields and the staff at Clackamas County Planning Department, and that we appreciate the detailed review of the project and the findings. I also want to thank Hearings Officer Turner for allowing us to present information on the project today. We're going to split this into three segments. So I'm going to start out by giving a brief overview of the project and the purpose and need for the project. I'll then turn it over to Ben, and he will do a brief overview of our application and how we've met the conditions for approval. And then finally, Will wrap up and provide some legal insight into the application. Okay. Also, before I dive into my presentation, I'll take a quick moment to address the question that was asked about concrete blocks. So there's a number of different types of pole construction that will occur on the course of the line. There are both wooden poles and steel poles proposed. For all of the wood poles, they will be direct bury in the ground. So there will be a hole augured into the ground and the pole will be embedded into the ground. That is a similar case for most of the steel poles as well. They will be direct embed. A handful of poles will be mounted on concrete foundations. Those foundations will be set into the ground, but they will have a lip between 4 and 6 inches sticking up above the ground. And generally, those foundations are a slightly larger diameter than the pole itself. So with that, I'll give just a brief high-level overview of the project, and then add a few other points just to provide context for the work that we're proposing. So the line that we're looking at today is actually a part of a larger project known as the Tonquin project for PGE. It's a multi-phase project. It includes a substation in Tualatin that was completed in May, and upgrades to about 11 miles of existing utility corridors to convert them to 115 kV transmission line. Those 11 miles are split across 4 different distinct segments that are located in Tualatin, Sherwood, the Stafford area, Wilsonville, and unincorporated areas of Clackamas County and Washington County. For the purposes of today's discussion, we are only talking about what's known as the Rosemont to Wilsonville 115 kV line. That's about a 7.4 mile long segment in total. And it follows a utility route that's been in use in some form since the 1940s. Ms. Fields noted that there are portions of that line that already have transmission lines on them. The remainder does have distribution level utility lines. Just briefly, I wanted to give the background for why PGE is pursuing this project. There's a handful of drivers that led to the project's inception. First and foremost is simply just the growing demand for energy. And I'll touch on this on a later slide as well. But that region in particular, the South metropolitan region, has had seen substantial growth in population in the last 5 decades. And frankly, there hasn't been the same amount of investment in electric infrastructure in that time. There's been no transmission infrastructure built in that area since the 1970s. So this project and others like it are an effort to start to catch up to that growth we've seen and meet it going into the future. Along with that, the project is going to strengthen the electrical grid. As we know, we are facing increased probabilities of extreme weather events. And this project will help us meet those demands and maintain electrical service through those events and support our customers. And then the last real driver for this is to support future economic growth. So we've seen large growth in the area in the past, and that's expected to continue. Along with that, there is a real push to electrify more and more parts of our daily lives and our economy, and PGE would like to be able to meet those demands as we go forward. This is an overall map showing all the components of the Tonquin project. So the Tonquin substation shows up over here, and then there's some other substations and facilities shown just for reference. But I would really like to focus on the Rosemont-Wilsonville line. So it starts in the north, which is the top right corner of this map at our existing Rosemont substation, which is just south of Lake Oswego at the intersection of Stafford and Rosemont. And then the proposed line would travel along Stafford Road all the way down until it hits Beckman Road in Wilsonville. And then the second terminus is at our Wilsonville substation in the city of Wilsonville. I would like to point out a couple things here. The dashed line that you can see on the south end from just south of the Ellickson Road intersection all the way into the Wilsonville substation already has 115 kV power line on it, and that line is going to be repurposed as part of this line. Additionally, on the north end, from the Rosemont substation until Borland Road, there is also already a 115 kV transmission line that goes to Meridian substation. That line is going to remain in service, and the proposed line would be added to those structures so that we would have what we call a two-circuit line in that portion. So the area or the length of line where we were converting from distribution to transmission is only from Borland Road to approximately Ellickson Road. I mentioned population growth previously, so this is just some statistics that we've pulled from Portland State University. It doesn't go back 50 years, but back into the 1990s. Data for not only Clackamas County, but some of the local communities in the area. As you can see, it's just been massive growth, anywhere from 30% to 300% growth. And all of that, all those new homes and businesses also drive demand for electricity. I also mentioned that we want to plan for future economic development and needs going forward. We have a staff at PGE that is focused just on that. They look at proposed housing developments, urban growth boundaries, business development, and any other data points that they can pull into their models to determine what our electricity demands are going to be in the future. So this is looking forward from our last study in 2024 up to 2035. And you can see it's simply an upward trend. So this is a list of anticipated megawatts to be added to the area. Finally, I want to talk just a little bit about how we landed on the proposed route. There was an extensive process looking at a number of different possibilities. So what I've got on the screen here is just some of the metrics that we looked at to determine the best route for this line. And I'm going to walk through the process. So at the outset, we simply identified every possible what we call link that could be utilized. So we weren't even looking for a full route, just any corridor, roadway, otherwise that could potentially be used for a power line. And so that's what you see in the dark blue lines here. These are all the segments and links that were initially considered for the project. With this first 30,000 foot view, we then examined each of those links in a bit more detail and trimmed down the full spectrum of possible links down to a handful of contiguous routes. And in looking at the links, any that stood out for various reasons could be they crossed a wetland or had other characteristics that made them just not a good fit. Those were the ones that were trimmed out. So moving on to this map, you can see these are the 3 contiguous routes that were trimmed out of all those potential links. And so these 3 routes were rigorously studied in detail by an engineering consultant, independent from PGE. They were weighed against the metrics that I showed previously, as well as others in a direct comparison to determine which was the most reasonable route for the project. And that's where we landed today with the route shown. So with that, I will turn it over to Ben.
Before you move on, why was the I-5-205 route excluded? It's my understanding it was because state law or ODOT policy prohibits it unless it's
Correct.
necessary, something to that effect.
Yes, it is prohibited. We at the very beginning reached out to ODOT directly on that because it seemed also to us as a good opportunity. We were told that we cannot run power lines in parallel with their facilities within their right of way. Of course, we could put it outside of the right of way, but that would involve acquiring easements from all those adjacent property owners.
Thanks.
Okay, Ben Schoenberger from Winterbrook Planning. Just to check that my audio and video are working okay okay, thanks.
Yep,
great.
Yep.
So Ben Schoenberger from Winterbrook Planning. We're a land use consultant that's been hired by PGE both to prepare the application that you are seeing and is being reviewed here today, and to explain the key land use issues associated with the project. So now that we've kind of understood the why and the what, I'm here to talk about the regulations and what it's going to take for us to get from where we're at now to an approved land use permit. So as Jordan mentioned, what this project is in land use terms is an upgrade of existing utility infrastructure. That infrastructure has been in place on the same site as we're talking here since the 1940s. And within unincorporated Clackamas County, which is the jurisdiction that this hearing is talking about, it's 134 poles total that are being replaced. And that segment of line, again, within the county is 5.9 miles of power lines on the corridor. That, as Jordan mentioned, a 7.4 mile segment. That's from the Wilsonville substation to the Rosemont substation, but a segment of that is in the city of Wilsonville and not subject to the jurisdiction of Clackamas County. So again, what this is to add transmission. Part of the corridor already has transmission. That will be upgraded, and the part of the corridor that does not have transmission will now include it. So that entire corridor will also have distribution lines at the lower level of the newly proposed poles. The image on the right of this slide is a photo simulation that PGE's consultants did that shows the existing condition at the top and a visualization of what it will look like after construction on the bottom. So that's the kind of development that we're talking about here. Next slide, please. Okay, so what permits are required to get us from point A to point B? It's worth noting that until last year, until 2024, and a project like this would have only required a right-of-way permit from Clackamas County, and a legislative change to the county code, including the footnote 35 that Joy mentioned. Okay, we're feeding.
Somebody just turned on their mic, I think. We're getting feedback.
Okay, I think
There we
we've
go.
got that fixed. Okay, so because of that footnote 35, now it is a conditional use review for new transmission along corridors such as this. There is a carve out. The Rosemont substation poles are a separate review, and that explains the two land use case file numbers on the cover of this. Those are a utility facility necessary for public service. That is a very carefully prescribed process under state law. In fact, county code just basically points to the OAR and the regulations that apply to that. We responded to all of that in this consolidated application as well. I do need to point out, and this is outlined in more detail in our application materials, that there is a reasonable argument against why this should be a conditional use review at all. And that, in essence, is the proposed facility is a utility line use. The existing facility that it's replacing is a utility line use. So these are both the same use. There's no actually new change in use. It's just an upgrade or replacement of the existing use. But regardless, as long as we've preserved that argument, we're going through this conditional use process anyway. But I did want to at least bring that up.
Okay.
So Joy also did a really good job of covering the exceptions or exemptions to conditional use. And there's, I like to think of it as kind of a filtering process that's going on here. Is we at PGE and our team are thinking of it as a entire utility line project. And that goes from the Rosemont substation to the Wilsonville substation. But things get filtered out in terms of land use. The first thing, obviously, is the southern part of that line that's in the city of Wilsonville is not at issue here today because that's somebody else's jurisdiction. Also, the replacement of distribution poles along this corridor are not at issue because code is very clear that distribution is not subject to a conditional use, only transmission. Filtered again beyond that are the Rosemont substation poles that I mentioned a minute ago. And then filtered beyond that are the poles that are in the exclusive farm use district and in public right-of-way. So those poles are also excluded from the use. So we start to shrink down the number of poles and the lines above them that are carried on these poles to fewer and fewer until the number that we're actually discussing here today are 75 poles. And those are the ones that are not in the RRFF5, that are in the RRFF5 and our transmission poles. But those other poles, either in the EFU or in the RRFF5 and our distribution, are excluded. This is also worth thinking about because we're going to hear some opponent testimony about the impact of particular poles or lines on their particular properties. And although we can't do an on-the-fly assessment of where those are located, if that pole or line in front of that property is on EFU land and in the right-of-way, it's actually not subject to this proceeding. So that's worth thinking about. Next slide. So I'd like to do a quick run through of the conditional use criteria that are most applicable here. I guess they're all applicable, but to touch on the ones that are the focus of our application and the testimony here today. Criterion A under 1203-03 is commonly referred to as the suitability criterion. And so that criterion talks about whether the subject property is suitable for the proposed development and proposed use. And now this is a very narrow criteria in that we're not talking about impacts on the surrounding area or impacts on neighbors. We're really talking about whether the property itself on which the development is proposed is suitable for that development. I think the strongest argument for why the answer to that is yes, is that there's an existing utility line on the subject property. That utility line has been there for nearly 80 years. It's a replacement and expansion of that line in terms of the heights of these poles and the number of lines, but this is not a new thing. The majority of that subject property is in this public right-of-way, and this is the absolute most common location for electric transmission and electric distribution lines in any jurisdiction, not just in Clackamas County, but anywhere in the state and really the country. Where you will find these facilities is along linear corridors that are typically transportation corridors, just like Stafford Road. So part of this criterion is to ask about the characteristics of that subject property and the things about them that make it suitable or not suitable for the proposed use. That list that's in the code is size, shape, location, topography, existence of improvements, and natural features. We go through each of those in the application materials, but I do think it's worthwhile to point out the existence of improvements characteristic. there again, there is a utility line along this corridor. And so that existence of that utility line is part of the baseline understanding for what the characteristics of that subject property are and whether it is or isn't suitable. So that is something that's evaluated in the materials that you can consult. The image on the right, again, is an actual photograph of a transmission corridor along another county road, not Stafford Road, obviously, but shows the way that these facilities can exist cheek by jowl with surrounding uses. So to the next criterion to look at is C, and that is whether the transportation system is adequate to handle the proposed use. Joy correctly pointed out that unmanned utility facilities, although unmanned isn't defined specifically, the plain language understanding of that matches what this is. It doesn't require any staff. There are no buildings associated with this utility facility. And that being the case, there's the citation to the ZDO that shows these kinds of facilities are specifically exempt from review under 1007-07. Even just intuitively, whether the transportation impacts from this facility will affect the surrounding area. Utility poles don't have transportation impacts. They don't generate any trips, especially replacing a pole with a taller pole does not create new transportation impacts. It doesn't affect access to any particular property. So that is the basis for us finding that criterion C is met. Here's the big one. Criterion D is sort of shorthand, the substantially limits, impairs, or precludes criterion. It's a long criterion and it includes a lot of definitions or a lot of terms that are not specifically defined within the criterion. So in our response, we tried to do a very careful job of breaking it apart into the individual words and phrases and defining each of them and seeing how they do or don't apply. The big one is the project cannot alter the character of the area. So what is character? And again, to point out that there is an existing utility line along this corridor, and therefore the existing poles are part of that character. The idea of altering the character, and if the character includes existing poles, it's important to consider that the baseline for what is in this evaluation is really just the increment of change. The evaluation should not be from a development site that has no development, no road, no buildings, no natural resources. The increment should be what's there now, and if it's altered, and that alteration has to be from all of that development existing to begin with. So Stafford Road and how busy it is and how close to the urban areas of the county it is also part of that existing character that one would have to find that is so dramatically altered, and the other parts of the sentence that come after that. And that includes surrounding area. So that's sort of a spatial limitation. We're not looking at what the potential impacts are, hundreds of miles away. We're looking at what the impacts are on the surrounding area. Well, where is that surrounding area? We initially did where would you possibly sense impacts, potential impacts from this new development? And looked at an area, and this is on a map in our submitted materials, twice the height of the tallest pole. So 300 feet from any pole or line along this corridor. Staff encouraged us to think bigger than that and to use as a proxy the mailed notification area of the site. So we took her advice, and we also added to that map 1/2 mile from any pole or line. That's a very large surrounding area. It's 3,100 acres, almost 3,200 acres of land. And most of that area won't experience or sense impacts or potential impacts from this at all, but that's in our materials. Within that surrounding area, there has to be a impact on primary uses in the area. Those primary uses, as Joy pointed out, are things like rural residential, farming uses, less so commercial uses. And the key point of that is that those primary uses are unchanged from this proposed development. Changing from a utility pole to a bigger utility pole does not mean that these people can no longer have residences or do farming or operate businesses. those things are all continuing, and asserting that they are impaired is different from actually having them be substantially limited, impaired, or precluded.
Mr. Schoenberger, I'll just note your timer has 16 minutes left out of your 40, which includes rebuttals. So
Okay, I'll
once you're
speed
aware
up.
of that.
Yes, thank you. So on this same criterion, we reviewed 7 different possible impacts that are listed in that first bullet point. We tried to just imagine the universe of things that could potentially be affected by this development. And in that exhaustive review of all those things, we based this on evidence and not just assertions. And that evidence is included in our exhibits, about 15 different exhibits that are the testimony of subject matter experts. And just to point out that our expertise comes from engineers, from economists, from wildlife biologists. It's a lot of information to look at every possible impact. And the conclusion that we reached was that either there was no change whatsoever in the surrounding area, and if there was a change, that it was minor and that it did not rise to the level of either altering the character of the entire area or of substantially limiting, impairing, or precluding the primary uses allowed in the zone. It's also important to point out that a change alone is not basis for denial under this criterion. We concede that change is going to occur. These are poles that will get taller. There are trees that do need to be removed. But that, as a hearings officer in a previous case said, that doesn't require that there is no impact at all. This criterion doesn't require that. And that opponents must identify a specific use and how it is quantitatively or specifically limited or impaired. And those uses include residential, farming, and commercial. E is consistent with the comp plan. The one that's particularly notable here is the scenic roads goal and policy in the comp plan. I'll point out that only 2.7 miles of this 5.9 mile corridor is a scenic road, and most of that section already has transmission lines on it. This also includes the area that is part of a county road widening project, which involved lots of tree removal and power line relocation and did not need any conditional use review. There's no explicit limitation or prohibition on scenic roads for transmission lines. And we did an inventory of all the, I think, 24 other scenic roads in the county, and 8 of them have transmission lines already on them. And so there'd be no precedent for using this policy as basis for denial. I won't spend much time on this because this is a separate review for the Rosemont substation poles. When this site was upgraded to substation use in 2011, a consultant did the same review and received, as far as I can tell, unopposed approval from the county in 2011 for essentially exactly the same utility facility necessary for public service use. So those are part of this overall application, but kind of a minor piece of it. So overall, we believe that we meet all the standards and criteria. And the reason we believe that is that we did a very thorough code review, carefully defined our terms, and then built a comprehensive, well-supported case with expert evidence to show how all these standards and criteria are met. So I thank you for your time. And unless there are direct questions for me, I'll hand over to Will.
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Will Rasmussen, Miller Nash Land Use Council, on behalf of the applicant PGE. I am just going to focus on the 2 criteria that have gotten the most attention in the record so far from a legal perspective. That being, slide please, Z0282-25 sub D and E. These are the criteria that relate to impacts on surrounding properties and the comprehensive plan. Fortunately, as it relates to subcriterion D, LUBA has already addressed how this code provision relates to surrounding properties, and it has held that it allows changes to the character of the area and even substantial impacts to surrounding properties. In LUBA's own words from York v. Clackamas County in 2019, altering the rural character of the surrounding area would not run afoul of this provision unless that alteration also substantially limits, impairs, or precludes the primary uses in the area. Statutory interpretation first requires us to look at the text. If you look at the text, there's clearly 3 sub-requirements for this criterion to even apply. First, the alleged impact must alter the character of the surrounding area. Second, it must substantially limit, impair, and preclude a use in the surrounding area. And third, that impacted or impaired use must be a primary use allowed in the zones. Fortunately, soon after the York decision came out, there was another conditional use application in Clackamas County, Willamette United case from 2019. And in that case, hearings officer Fred Wilson addressed this criterion in detail over 3 pages and found these 3 elements to exist. That case involved a proposal for a 24-acre training facility as a conditional use on Borland Road. It's worth noting that that proposal is just less than a half a mile from the Stafford transmission line proposed in this subject application. In Willamette, Stafford neighbors in the RRFF5 zone argued that this criterion was not met because of limits or impairments that it supposedly caused to traffic, lighting, and noise on the surrounding residential and farm uses. Hearings officer diligently went through the framework laid out by York. He applied dictionary definitions for substantially limit and substantially impaired, and then noted that, quote, this criterion only considers whether the proposed use would substantially limit or preclude the primary uses allowed in the underlying district. And he found that those primary uses were not impaired by those alleged incremental impacts. Specifically regarding residential use in the Stafford area, he found, I do not see that that is a substantial impairment of the residential use, the overwhelming amount of which occurs in the actual residences. Again, traffic impacts, noise impacts, light impacts don't actually stop somebody from primarily using their house. Same reasoning applies for farms. Slide, please. That exact reasoning applies equally well, if not better, in the subject Tonquin project. Just like in the Willamette case here, we have some Stafford neighbors with residential and farm uses opposing a proposed conditional use. Here we have opponents alleging impacts based on marginal increases to existing conditions. In Willamette United, that was traffic, lights, and noise. Here there's allegations of marginal increases to power lines, fire risk, wildlife, and the like. In this case, though, there's actually detailed expert reports addressing each of those alleged impacts, mostly finding that those impacts do not exist. Where there are some impacts, it's a marginal increase. So even if the hearings officer were to accept the arguments from opponents that there is some additional increase from the visual impact of a taller pole or some marginal increase to noise from power lines, that falls squarely within the reasoning laid out by hearings officer Wilson in the Willamette United case. And I would respectfully encourage the hearings officer to follow that same reasoning. Applicants submitted a copy of that case into the record recently. I'm not sure what system Clackamas County has for finding previous hearings officers' decisions. We wanted to make sure it was available in this case. Next, the second criterion that gets the most attention is 120303 sub E. This is the criterion that calls for consistency with the comprehensive plan. I will just note briefly that consistency does not allow a decision maker to read requirements into policies that are simply not there. Most of the comprehensive plan goals and policies cited by opponents to this project are aspirational goals and policies, as you would expect. And the county has to balance those various aspirational goals and policies. And I will point out, when Clackamas County decides it really wants to have a true prohibition, it uses the word prohibit or the words shall not in its comprehensive plan and in its code. And those words and phrases do not apply to most of the comprehensive plan goals and policies addressed in this case. The basic statute for Oregon statutory construction in ORS 17404 directs decision makers to not insert what has been omitted in interpreting law, and that applies here. The picture on this slide just shows before and after of a typical section of this application. One comprehensive plan provision that has attracted a lot of attention in testimony is the Stafford Road being designated in the comprehensive plan as a rural scenic road. Applicant does not contest the beauty of Stafford Road or that it's designated as a rural scenic road. However, Comprehensive Plan Policy 5.I.3 designates 24 such roads as scenic rural roads in Clackamas County. And if the hearings officer looks at the map of those roads that's in the comprehensive plan, he will see that they crisscross all of Clackamas County like a patchwork from north to south, to east to west. It includes large sections of Highway 26, Highway 35, 211, and 224. And these rural scenic roads include power lines. As Ben just mentioned, 8 of them include transmission lines, including Stafford. In this context, it is clear that the County Commission did not intend to prohibit transmission lines and power lines along these roads. Doing so would be impossible. Very briefly on the statutory context, ORS 758-010 plainly grants utilities a right and privilege, that's a direct quote, to construct and maintain and operate electric transmission lines along public roads. This is a statute that's been on the books since the 1950s. It's just necessary for all of us to get the power that we need, that power lines be along roads. The statute only allows authority for the county to direct where on the road that line goes. The implication of this is that, respectfully, the hearings officer should interpret this code consistent with state law to allow the power lines and not accept any of the interpretations proposed by project opponents that would prohibit it. Slide, please. Joy talked about conditions of approval. We've submitted red line conditions of approval in a clean version that just cleans up the conditions a little bit to more closely track the approval criteria they relate to and the facts in the record. Slide, please. In conclusion, applicant has prepared many detailed studies, reports, and a narrative in the record that unequivocally demonstrates compliance with the applicable approval criteria. Accordingly, applicant respectfully requests that the hearings officer follow the staff recommendation and approve this needed project to provide power to a growing county. Applicant is done with his prepared remarks. If there's any questions, we will also like to save our time for rebuttal.
Okay, I don't have any questions. I'll note the applicant has about 4.5 minutes left. Can we reset the timer for 15? And Mr. Hathaway, who's representing the opposition group, Save Stafford. Sorry, I don't remember the exact name of the opposition group, but his client. So, Mr. Hathaway, do we need to promote him or unmute him?
Yes, just give me a second. I'm doing multiple things here.
That's fine. I just wanted to make sure. We'll get to Mr. Hathaway in just a moment.
Mr. Hathaway noted in a recent email that Ed Wagner would also be joining and helping with the presentation. So just so you know.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Turner, can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
Great. Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Turner. For the record, my name is Greg Hathaway. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Hathaway Larson. My address is 1125 Coote Street in Portland, 97209, and Hathaway is Hathaway. I represent Safe Stafford Road. Safe Stafford Road is a nonprofit organization consisting of concerned property owners who own single-family residences and farmland in the Stafford Road area who believe the use of their property will be substantially impaired by PGE's proposed project. Safe Stafford Road filed its response to PGE's proposed project and it's marked as Exhibit 12 in this record. This response provides the legal basis for the hearings officer to deny the application. Here's how we intend to make our presentation this morning with the time that we have. I will introduce Ed Wagner, an officer of Safe Stafford Road and a property owner within the Stafford Road area. Mr. Wagner will show you slides that he created using PGE's own pictures, showing the comparative differences between PGE's current existing power lines and PGE's new high-powered transmission lines and significantly taller steel poles. We believe this evidence demonstrates that this is not a marginal change, as Mr. Hutchison was referring to earlier. This is a significant change outside any characterization that what's happening here is a marginal change along Stafford Road and in the Stafford Road area. Mr. Wagner's comparative pictures were recognized by staff, and staff's denial of PGE's application for an alteration of its non-conforming use as demonstrating that PGE's proposed project created greater adverse impact within the Stafford Road area. I'd like to read to you exactly what staff said in reviewing Mr. Wagner's slides that you're going to see in just a few minutes. This is a quote. Staff is most persuaded by exhibits 3 through 17 of Save Stafford Road submittal, which Save Stafford Road states were derived from PGE's website for the Tonkin project, of which this proposal is a part. These simulations clearly demonstrate that the project will have significant visual impacts in comparison to the existing lines. The added height, larger diameter poles, and additional wires combine to create a far more industrial aesthetic than the current power lines, an aesthetic that is inconsistent with the current visual identity of the area. As you will see in a few moments, as did staff, these comparative pictures are startling regarding the adverse visual impact in the Stafford Road area. It demonstrates that PGE's proposed project will devastate the character of the Stafford Road area. After Mr. Wagner, I will present a brief argument that PGE has not met its burden of proof that the proposed project will not substantially impair uses within the Stafford Road area. Now I'd like to introduce Ed Wagner. And Joe, I believe that staff's going to assist Mr. Wagner with this slide presentation.
Yes, good morning. My name's Ed Wagner. My residence is 21620 Southwest Stafford Road, Tualatin. And my objective is to show 9 of the 21 side-by-side slides. And I would ask that staff supply all 21 of these slides to the hearing officer, if at all possible, at some point.
I think they're already in the record, but I'll ask staff to confirm that when they testify again.
Thank you. I'd like to, in all effort for transparency while we're looking at this first slide, I'd like to stipulate how these were created. Basically, these, these come directly off of the PGE website, but the difference is that they're shown in a sequential manner. We simply took and put them side by side. I do give a lot of credit to PGE. They are to scale, and the dimensions that are shown at the bottom of the slide, the 65.5 foot versus the 125 foot, are very accurate. As you'll see in this particular slide, the new pole is so tall in their efforts to show the comparison, they really didn't have enough room. The 9 slides in almost every case will show that every new pole will be at least twice as tall as the existing one. And also, in most cases, the diameters will be twice the thickness that are in the existing poles. We also want to point out that the pole placements are very accurate in terms of where the existing poles currently are. That's not always a true reflection of what will happen, because obviously sometimes the new poles will be slightly removed from the existing poles. But if you look at the surrounding area, like the cars and any other relevant pictures there, you can see that the poles are in exact position. Next slide, please. Right, this is a simulation 5. This is one of our examples of where the trees will be removed. You can see in the existing slide, the 47.5, the pole is almost kind of immersed in the tree areas. But in order for the new poles to be created in this particular section of road, all of those trees were removed. The other element of this after effect is to kind of demonstrate the industrial look that we've purported in our thought processes of what this road, what the Stafford Road will ultimately look like with these exceedingly taller and wider poles. Next one, please. Oh, yeah, thank you. This is just another example. In this case, this pole is almost 2.5. These poles are almost 2.5 times taller than the existing pole. Next slide, please. This slide is really one of the more important and critical poll suggestions that PGE is making. If you'll notice, the little white building there in the middle of each picture is the Westland Wilsonville Administration Building. And the essence of this is that these high voltage transmission lines will be going almost over the very edge of the building. We've made a number of efforts to try to get anybody to consider the EMF radiation aspects of these high voltage transmission lines, especially up against the West Lynn building and also at the Church of Resurrection, where they build a new school building. These high voltage transmission lines will also be very close to where the children will be going to school. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is a good example of one of the poles that are so tall and heavy that you can see all the additional support lines because of all the weights these poles are bearing. I suspect in this case, as Jordan Messenger indicated, this one may actually be on concrete blocks. Next slide, please. We're going to go through these fairly quickly now. I think you're getting a sense of what we're getting at here. You can see just the massive differential in height in the industrial look to this. Next one, please. This is simulation 16, which gives a broad, long view of what a series of these poles will look like on Stafford Road. They will be very obvious. They're going to stick out like a sore thumb, and they're really going to turn the road into a very industrial look. And I think we'll just go through the next two very quickly. In both cases, here's a case where the pole can't even be shown in its entirety because it's just too tall and a greater than 2:1 ratio. And our last slide is another slide that reflects 2:1. So it was very interesting to me in the applicant's effort to downplay the character change that all of these new high voltage transmission poles and lines would create on our semi-rural road. As Mr. Hathaway commented, the county has already stated in their permit denial that these simulations were influential in their analysis. I think it's worth reading this quote again. These simulations clearly demonstrate the project will have significant visual impacts in the comparison to the existing lines. The added height, larger diameter poles, and additional wires combine to create a more industrial aesthetic than the current power lines, an aesthetic that is inconsistent with the current visual identity of the area. Essentially, the county already determined that the character of our rural road will be changed significantly. I think one could easily interpret and summarize this statement to mean this project would have a very negative impact on the scenic beauty of the road and area. What is curious is staff's recommendation seems to ignore this previous evaluation, in spite of the fact that it also seems to ignore the intent and spirit of the scenic road designation from the comprehensive plan. But here's the kicker. More importantly, staff's recommendation also seems to overlook the RRFF5 zoning and development ordinance 309. I would like to specifically point to ZDO ordinance 309.01B for RRFF5 properties to state as one of the main purpose criteria to conserve the natural scenic beauty of the county. That's the same thing that we just talked about on the rejection on the non-conforming permit application. The county has already concluded that this project would severely impact the natural scenic beauty of the road and area. In fact, it was most likely the major reason the non-conforming permit was denied. If for no other reason, in our opinion, this CUP permit should be rejected out of hand, as if approved, it will violate a clearly stated county zoning ordinance. And then I'd like to make one last comment, and this is a personal comment and mine alone. I have dedicated many hours, hundreds of hours in the past 2 years and gotten to know almost all of our property owners on a personal basis. Up to this point, I have found the planning department to be respectful and efficient in our communications. However, I found it offensive and very unprofessional. The staff made a comment that maybe property devaluations would be good, as it might allow first-time homeowners to purchase property on Stafford Road. Let that statement sink in for a moment. The staff actually suggested that it would be a good thing for property owners to lose 10, 20, maybe even 30% of value of their homes, so first-time buyers could purchase property on Stafford Road. To me, this is a callous and very insensitive comment, and quite frankly, puts into question some of the thinking in staff's recommendations. We have second, third, and fourth generation homeowners on Stafford Road who invested their hard work and life savings in their properties, and they deserve better respect than what these comments suggest. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Mr. Hathaway, you have any further?
Yes, I do, Mr. Turner. Again, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Thank you very much. The land use case before you today is a clash between a very serene and beautiful area of Clackamas County along Stafford Road and a new massive high-powered transmission line project that staff has previously characterized as inconsistent with the current visual identity of the Stafford Road area. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, that inconsistency that the staff previously used as a basis to deny PGE's request for an alteration to its non-conforming use does not mean a marginal change in the aesthetics and the visuals in the Stafford Road area. I think that's a big point that Mr. Hutchinson raised, and the PGE staff making testimony today, is that this is a very minor change in their opinion. And I think Mr. Wagner's comparative pictures clearly demonstrate that this is something more than just a minor or marginal change. In fact, it indicates a very substantial visual impact that impairs the use of property within the Stafford Road area. Again, as Mr. Wagner has shown, all you have to do is look at the comparison between the existing PGE facilities and what is proposed and realize that replacing old low-profile distribution poles with massive high-voltage transmission towers is a dramatic and legally significant change than simply upgrading existing already tall transmission lines. The county's denial of the non-conforming use application, we believe, is instructive and relevant in this land use proceeding. And again, I'll repeat that. We believe the county's denial of PGE's application for an alteration of non-conforming use is instructive and relevant in this land use proceeding. Let me explain. Both requests by PGE have commonality. First, it's the same applicant, PGE. Second, it's the same proposed project in the same area, the Stafford Road area. Third, the property owners and residents within the Stafford Road area have the same concerns. Fourth, it's the same adverse visual aesthetic impact that would be inconsistent with the current visual identity of the Stafford Road area as previously determined by staff. We believe that that finding by staff in the non-conforming use decision demonstrates that what is being proposed in this conditional use permit makes worse the visual identity or character in the Stafford Road area. That equates to this project then substantially impairing the visual impact of property within Stafford Road that alters the character of the Stafford Road area. Now, the interesting thing, Mr. Turner, is that staff made that finding that I just quoted in denying the application for the non-conforming use application. But in this application, staff is recommending approval with conditions. And we don't understand how staff can reach that conclusion when it previously reached the conclusion that it did, because it's the same conclusion that should be applicable in this case, involving the adverse visual aesthetic impacts of the character of the Stafford Road area. So we believe that that finding that staff made in the first decision of denial can be used in this case by you in denying this application, at least based upon the adverse visual impact or visual adverse impacts to the aesthetics of the Stafford Road area. Now, what staff does in its staff report is on this issue, it talks about it's a subjectivity decision about whether or not there's a marginal visual change or something more, like staff found in the first decision. We believe that staff's position that this is a subjective decision is significantly different than the decision they made in the first case, which we think is applicable here. But the point I want to make is if it's subjective, then we would request the hearings officer to defer to the subjective opinion of those that are adversely affected in the Stafford Road area as determining whether or not the project that creates these adverse visual impacts is in fact altering the character of the Stafford Road area. But in closing, I would just say that it's our position that, just in closing, Mr. Turner, I just say that the burden of proof has not been met here. PG has not presented any testimony to rebut the staff's previous finding, and the PG has not attempted to explain the differences between the before and the after as displayed by Mr. Wagner. We don't believe then that PG has been its burden of proof. We will request a continuance under ORS 197763, and we intend to, in our closing statements to you during this continuance period, to specifically address all the other concerns and issues that we have, besides just the visual impact issue, in presenting an argument to you as to why you should not approve this application. Be happy to
continue open record.
Just the open record. I assume
Okay.
777.
Yeah, that would be what, excuse me, get up there. That's what I would be predisposed to do. If somebody wants to request a longer period, I consider that. But I just want to clarify that you want an open record, not another hearing, continued hearing.
That is correct, Mr. Turner. My request is to do the 777 as we typically would do.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I'd be predisposed to do that unless somebody requests something longer. One quick question, Mr. Hathaway, do you know if the prior non-conforming use decision in the record for this case? I know there were a lot of quotes from it. I don't recall if the actual decision is in there. Ms. Fields may be able to answer that if you don't know offhand. If it's not, can you submit it during the open record period?
Yes, I think Joy is correct. She's nodding her head. I can see. I don't believe it's actually officially in the record, but I'm sure she will submit it to the record, and we will certainly attach it to any materials that we submit to you.
Okay, as long as it's in there, I think I can take official notice, but it's easier if it's in the record so I can actually find it because I'm not sure what the number is. Thank you, Mr. Hathaway. I've got a couple of raised hands, Janine Braun, and again, I'll request that people not repeat testimony offered by our prior witnesses. If a prior witness has already addressed all the issues you wanted to address, you can just give us your name and address. I agree with the prior testimony, and that's sufficient to preserve your right to appeal. Ms. Braun, I'm not sure what we need to do.
Hi, this is Jeannie
Braun,
Braun. Address is 24805 Southwest Gage Road. I also, that's my mailing address where I have a house, and then where my children live. And then I have 25945 Southwest Stafford Road where I live. Both areas would have new poles. The house on Gage Road, the backyard is about 200 to 250 feet from the new power pole, which studies have shown the electromagnetic rays are harmful to children, and I have grandchildren that live there, with an above ground pool right in the backyard. So I have concerns that two things, well, more than two things. I agree with all the previous testimony, which I won't repeat, but I also have grave concerns about the safety of my children playing in their backyard. This is been studied in other countries and in the US, and the findings are that there's an increased incidence of childhood leukemia. And so that's one reason that I object to this. The other is the decreased property value. This is our life savings within our home, and PGE offered for our easement like $6,000 when our property values are going to decrease by, probably 25%. I found it interesting that PGE, so they checked into all of these different scenarios and did professional evaluations of different aspects of the property, but they didn't have any property value analysis on the decreased property value. And so they're offering homeowners a very small amount of money for their easements that are going to directly impact the views. And I hadn't heard that comment about making it more affordable for first-time homeowners, but that's pretty ridiculous to take someone's home value and then just not reimburse them for it. So that's
Yeah, the
another
reimbursement
concern.
issue is not before me. It has to be addressed through the condemnation action, but I understand the concern and
Yeah,
your
well,
that
if
it does
PGE is not
relate.
fair during the condemnation action, then, it won't, it'll have to be a large corporation against, just
I
individual
understand,
homeowners. And
but
okay,
it's not
so,
something I can address in this proceeding.
okay. And then another thing that hasn't really been brought up it directly is that a number of trees that are in this easement area and alongside Stafford are heritage trees that have been in place probably before the state was a state. And the 250 trees that they say that there's a number of trees, but they don't mark the trees. A number of these trees are 48 to 72-inch oak trees. And they are considered a heritage tree that takes, decades to grow. And white and black oak trees. When I'm in the construction business, and when my son-in-law was an engineer for the planning of a large-scale public works project in Lake Oswego, and they spent 6 months in planning and pre-design determining the optimal location of a reservoir, and they had to preserve as many trees as possible, which included
That's Lake
large scale.
Oswego standard. I don't believe the county does not, Clackamas County does not have a tree preservation ordinance. Different jurisdictions treat
Yeah.
trees in different ways. So I understand the concern, but that's something I can't consider. But I will
Well,
consider in relation to how it applies to the conditional use approval that it'll change.
okay, but the project was in Clackamas County. It wasn't in the city of Lake Oswego. So I could, send a something in about that.
If
But
you want to submit it, that's fine. I'll review it and consider it.
okay, PGE says that they had they did consider the I-5205 right away, and that ODOT does not allow that. But they didn't challenge ODOT. ODOT is not a state law.
They cited the ODOT, the ORS, excuse me, Oregon Administrative Rule OARs that state that.
Okay, state backed, but then
written.
the outside of the right of way option is more reasonable and would disturb less scenic route and so they would have to acquire easements. I agree on that. But the easements would not disturb the character of the homes, put people at risk for property devaluation, and put people at risk for health reasons, and get rid of trees, these 250 trees. So I see that the permitting and public improvement process in their planning and route analysis eliminates that just right off the bat because it's not feasible within the right of way for ODOT. But
I
they
understand,
didn't.
Ms. Braun, your time has run out, so I'm
Okay.
going to put this in writing if you want during the
Thank
open
you.
record.
I did.
And I'll
Thanks.
ask staff to start the timer again for 3 minutes. We didn't do it this time, but I was tracking roughly.
Okay, thanks for
Thank
the
you, Ms. Braun.
opportunity.
And Ms. Braun, can you click on the raise your hand so that we know you've had the opportunity to testify? Jeff Yap, you'll need to unmute yourself. And can we start the 3-minute timer when Mr. Yap is unmuted? Mr. Yap, you're still muted.
Can you hear me?
There you go. Yep,
Great.
there you go.
Great. My name is Jeffrey Yap. I live at 22275 Barnon Road, which is directly off Stafford Road. I'm going to address the health concerns that seem to not be discussed in detail today. I have a son. He's autistic. He lives on the spectrum. He's 29 years old. When exposed to high levels of EMF, he stopped speaking. We have spent tens of thousands of dollars to create an environment in our home that protects him from EMF. We've had the roof re-roofed, protected. We've had paint put on his rooms. We have our electricity turned off at night. It's clearly demonstrated. I have retained a subject matter specialist on EMF impacts on children. As it relates to this case, I'm going to read you the note that should be in the record, but I don't think it is, but I'll give it to you. Our son experiences significant disruptions in his speech capabilities when exposed to EMF. We have invested tens of thousands of dollars in protective measures to minimize this exposure. High voltage power lines proposed along Stafford Road would significantly compromise my son's ability to communicate and pose significant health risks. I have attached global studies demonstrating the harmful effects of EMF exposure. The Bioinitiative 2012 states 43 of new EMF, ELMF papers and 2 static magnetic field papers that report on geotoxic effects of ELMF published between 2007 and 2012 are profiled. 35 of those, or 81%, show significant negative effect. 8 or 19% show no effect. The European EMF Guideline 2016 emphasized EMF exposure should be clinically recognized as part of chronic multi-symptom and illnesses, recommending significant exposure reduction to manage new systems effectively. Lawrence Gust, subject matter expert, 1996. The majority of these EMF studies, 8 out of 11, show that children living in homes near high voltage transmission lines, near high current carrying local distribution lines, show statistically significant risk of developing cancer. Additionally, I had 2 letters, comprehensive bibliographies prepared by Richard W. Woodley and the Princeton Coalition on EMF, which include extensive research the detrimental health effect of EMF exposure. These bibliographies contain over 250 scientific studies, most indicating significant health risks, including increased risk of cancer, neurological effects, and various chronic health conditions. We talk about the significant increase in population. The claimant, the person providing, talked about significant growth. 1 in 12 kids are being born on the spectrum. They are significantly impacted by EMF. There are alternatives to where they want to run the power lines that may cost them more, would be much safer for people living in the areas. Yet we don't talk about that at all.
Okay.
None of the people
Yap, your
arguing
time
for
has
who
run
live in
out.
the area.
If you want to submit that in writing,
I will.
You can during the open rec and those cited studies as well. Thank you, Mr. Yap.
I will.
You click on the raise your hand button as well, so good. Away. Kelly Bartholomew.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Hearings Officer. Before my time starts, I have a small question. I was an intervener in the PUC docket for this case for almost a year, and I now have this case before the appeals court. And may I please have an additional 1 minute to address what has happened at the PUC that is related to this case?
I'm not sure how it's relevant to this case because the PUC process is totally separate from this
Oh,
one.
it's relevant because it is how lines have been classified between transmission and distribution, which is directly quoted in this process.
Okay, I'll give you the extra minute. Can we reset the timer for that for 4 minutes?
Thank you.
I'm interested to hear
Yeah.
what you have to say.
Okay, yeah, it is interesting. Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to speak. And after nearly 3 years of this process, dozens of meetings, county ZDO changes, a highly contested PUC docket, briefings, hearings, 2 full legislative sessions, 1 denied county land use permit, and 1 pending appeals court case, and thousands of hours of my time. This document by staff is the most inconsistent and, I believe, indefensible morally, practically, and perhaps most importantly, statutorily. The project does not meet the conditional use approval criteria under ZDO 120303D. It violates the comprehensive plan's scenic road policy. The policy states that development must have visual characteristics appropriate to the setting. As has been said previously, staff concluded that this project is not visually appropriate to the setting and that it is actually inconsistent. Staff clearly recognized the project would alter the character, but staff now fails to recognize how those alterations will impair the primary uses within the zone in violation of ZDO 120303D. The first primary use in the ZDO RRFF5 316-1 table is single-family dwelling. In other words, living in a single-family dwelling is a primary use. Farming is also a primary use.
What is also primary use? I missed that.
Farming.
Thank you. Yeah.
The county has determined that devaluation of property is a good thing because it will open up the market to first-time buyers.
I disagree with that finding, and it's not something I'm going to consider.
Okay. They also said it would be a positive step to remove trees because it would open up views and vistas. Unfortunately, for current residents, a decrease in property values means a decrease in home equity to leverage for retirement or to buy grain for their farm or to raise a family.
I understand that, Ms. Bartholomew, but the Land Use Board of Appeals has ruled in Tilcott v. Clackamas County that property values are not something I can consider in regards to the conditional use criteria.
Well, if it's going to force someone to move out of their home, that's clearly a significantly impairing event, right?
If it forces them to move out of their home, but there has to be evidence to show
Yes.
that.
Well, if people have a 20% decrease in the value of their property, many aren't going to be able to farm anymore because they're not going to have the equity to be able to leverage that farm things that they do to farm and live. So it is kind of related. Additionally, months and years of construction and road delays will likely cause visitors to go elsewhere, further limiting and impairing farm business. Long-term, farm visitors may find driving through an industrial power corridor with 250 cut-down trees is not a great rural experience, further harming local farms. The law is clear. Oregon's statewide planning goals say that counties must protect scenic resources. That is goal number 5. And they must preserve scenic corridors. That is goal number 15. And Clackamas County's own comprehensive plan echoes those protections, which are codified in law under ORS 197.175. This law is not advisory, it is binding. Therefore, Clackamas County must protect farmland and scenic areas, not destroy them to open up the market. If the project does not comply with the ZDO and the comprehensive plan, the only lawful decision is to deny it. Respectfully, Mr. Hearings Officer, I urge you to uphold the county's own rules by denying this permit. Doing so affirms fairness and protects the community from incompatible uses and undermining farmland and neighborhood and scenic roads. Now, quickly to my 1 minute for the PUC. PGE and staff will tell you that this case is not precedent setting because high voltage lines already exist.
Ms. Bartholomew, your time has up, your extended time is up, so you can submit that in writing and I will consider it. But I gave you the extra time.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that went really fast.
Everybody is subject to the same limitations.
Okay, was that the extra minute? You gave me the extra.
That was 4 minutes.
Wow, that went very fast. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Randall Yamada.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. My name's Randall Yamada. That's YAMADA. Address 3291 Childs Road, Lake Oswego. And I'm speaking for the Stafford, as the Stafford Tualatin Valley Community Planning Organization chairperson. On Z0282-25. Our Hamlet and CPO has voted 10-0 in favor of supporting Save Stafford Road in their opposition to the transmission line on Stafford Road. The applicant bears the burden of proof. This next section is to dovetail with the comments made by Ed Wagner. And the idea, the negative effect of these transmission poles and lines, its objective was initially evaluated through cognitive science methods by Jones and Jones, the Jones and Jones planning firm, for the Bonneville Power Administration in 1976. Copies are submitted. They found visual impacts produced by transmission lines were a measurable and actual phenomenon. The Bureau of Land Management found the results so interesting, they commissioned the Argonne National Laboratory to perform a series of similar studies resulting in methods and eventually resulting in methods and manuals of assessing visual contrast impacts of transmission lines. Studies were undertaken by others nationally and internationally. Transmission line conferences were held where results were presented and discussed. Jones and Jones and Argonne National Laboratory are the best in their fields. Each study built on previous studies and results explain aesthetic values scientifically. Monopoles were evaluated. Visual impact analysis using statistical cognitive science methodologies show that the highest levels, 5 and 6, would apply to residents along Stafford Road, where the transmission system is a major focus of visual attention and occupies most of the visual field. They determined photo simulations underrepresent actual conditions. The scale level starts at 1, where transmission system is at the extreme limit of visibility and ends at level 6. The studies describe higher visibility as worst case. Copies of some studies are.
Thank you, Mr. Yamada. You can submit that. And if you have further, you can submit in writing.
May I have additional time as myself, as a resident?
No, you can submit it in writing, sir. Well, your was that testimony on behalf, was that adopted by the Stafford CPO, or isn't it just your testimony?
That is both adopted by the Stafford CPO.
Yeah, I understand the Stafford CPO supports the opposition, but
it is also information that I have. It's both. And
I'll give you an extra minute. I'll give you an extra minute to testify on your own behalf.
Okay. So
reset the timer.
Stafford Road is not just a rural area. It's a community with history, cultural, educational, businesses, civic, and community organizations. In planning terms, Stafford Road is our main street connecting Lake Oswego, West Lynn, Tualatin, Wilsonville, and I-205. It represents our community and currently one of the best places to live in the metro area. The PGE line visual physical presence improperly establishes a transmission corridor adjacent to and over existing residences and public buildings along our main street. This permanently alters and substantially limits the present and future use of its physical, its measurable impact on the people of this community. The future planning of the Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Yamada.
Okay. Thank you.
Jerry, Gerri, I don't have a last name. You're unmuted, but we're not hearing you yet. Still not hearing you.
What happened?
No, barely hearing you. Can you move closer to your microphone or?
Up here, closer. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, but it's kind of echoey.
I don't know how to fix that.
Pardon?
I don't know how to fix that. How do I do that?
I don't know if you can move close to your computer or whatever you're using to participate.
Okay, I'm not.
There you go. That's great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, my name is Sharon Vick. I live at 22720 Southwest Stafford Road.
Can you spell your last name? Because I missed that.
Vick, V-I-C-K.
Thank you.
Okay, I have 3 power lines pulled on my property. And, in a easement. I have 1 power pole that's just right almost, exactly in the front yard. I am
One
very
power pole
close.
that sits. I'm sorry, you're kind of coming and going. One power pole that sits what?
I have 1 power pole that's actually in my front yard.
Okay.
I am close to the road. They want to give me an easement. They want to take 30 feet off of my.
I'm sorry, mistake. You're fading in. Your voice is fading in and out. I'm going to request that you log off and log back in and see if that helps. So when you come back on, we'll have you testify at that point. But I'm just not getting all of what you're saying. So can you leave the meeting and come back, and we'll bring you back on.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Hopefully that will do it.
Okay.
In the meantime, Ed Wagner Jr.
It's not letting me unmute.
I can hear you.
You can hear me? Wonderful. Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, Mr. Turner. My name's Ed Wagner Jr. I'm the son of Ed Wagner Sr., who spoke earlier, and I grew up at 21620 Southwest Stafford Road. I want to comment on an important point that Mr. Messenger and his team did not mention today. This power line on Stafford Road is a second layer of redundancy for the substations that connect within the new Tonquin substation with part of the Tonquin project. This power line deployment is not necessary to accommodate the growing power needs in Clackamas County. This information is documented in docket PCN 6 in the matter of Portland General Electric Company's certification of public convenience and necessity, as well as feasibility studies from PGE and their partners, which are also in the records. This is relevant to this conditional use case because there is no substantial need for this power line, as N-1-1 NERC federal power line requirements for redundancy are not relevant for this project. That's all I have to say. Thank you again for your time, and thank you to everybody today for Safe Stafford Road. I agree with every point that was said. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Rick Cook. Okay, there you go.
Great, finally got that there. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Rick Cook from 18451 Southwest Stafford Road. Just want to give us some real quick brief. 125 years of stewardship on the Shipley Cook farmstead. I always like to throw this in. 100 years ago, my grandfather was the county assessor. Not that and $10 won't get me a beer most places, but just like to throw that in. But we've been working with the county for numerous years on land use issues in the Stafford area. So live directly right across the street from the substation. It's a walk across Stafford Road, and they're onto our property, which I'd like to request that the record stays open, which could conceivably lead to a later hearing. And my concern is that the conditional use criteria D potential impacts in the surrounding area, primary uses, and the change of character. I was in contact this morning with SHPO, which is the State Historic Preservation Office, and trying to find out if that all federal state regulations on development impacts on a National Register of Historic Places. Our property is on the National Register, and they're going to be replacing 7 new poles, evidently at the substation will be substantially higher, and just wondering what the rules and regulations for the impact on a National Register property will have on that. And I have not yet heard back from the 2 people I've reached out to at the SHPO office.
Okay, but your property is on the National Register, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay,
They
just want to
put
make
that
sure I
on
got
there
that.
in 2008 after they took a quarter of an acre for the roundabout. So
Mhm.
we've been involved in land use on the hot corner out here at Stafford, Rosemont, for numerous years. And then my last thing is just out of necessity, and I know people have discussed it, is the fact that PGA's one of their reasons for doing this is, and they had posted this on their line, is that PGA's margin of profitability. Well, that goes without saying. I know you probably can't deal with that. And then the other thing is that from 2004, there's been a loss of over 5,000 jobs in Intel, with a lot of this energy is headed towards Washington County, Beaverton, Hillsborough. So that's another thing that hopefully you can take into development. And the fact that Stafford area would be $2.7 billion for development. So there's nothing in the long range transportation plan or any plans for anything that's going to happen out here in the near future. So to say that, boy, we need this because, this area is going to blow up is not based on any facts that I know of. So with that, I appreciate your time. And once again, I just request that the record be open and the possibility of a hearing at a future date.
Thank you, Mr. Cook.
Thank
Joe Ratty.
Good morning, Mr. Turner.
Good morning.
My name is Joe Ratti, spelled R-A-T-T-I. My wife Connie and I live at 25015 Southwest Stafford Road. I agree with the prior testimony as it relates to safety. One thing I think we haven't really talked about is the fact that we are in a let it burn zone. We have no fire protection whatsoever. Our property is across the street from where these poles will be established. I have approximately 1/10 of a mile of road frontage along Stafford Road. 1/10 of a mile of trees that are about 100 or 125 feet tall. My concern is if there should be a fire, we have no way to leave our property other than on Stafford Road. As it relates to health, I agree with the comments about EMF. I think one of my concerns is right now, I think the PGE is thinking about using lines that will be carrying, if my vernacular is correct, 115 kVs. But these poles are designed to carry much higher voltage lines, which I have to believe is going to happen. PGE has been less than transparent through this whole process. And I can't believe that they're not going to upgrade these lines once and if this project is approved. Finally, our property has an Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife deferral through the county. We are in a wildlife corridor, and I think this ties in with the scenic value of this area. We're one of the few places left in this part of the valley that has property available for wildlife sanctuary. Finally, I think because of all the traffic we have on Stafford Road, a lot of people dumping off of 205 and using it as a shortcut, is it's a much nicer place to be stuck in traffic than on the interstate. So there is a scenic value to others, not just the folks that live here. The last meeting we had with PGE, I sat next to a councilman on the Wilsonville City Council who told me that they appreciate the value and the beauty of where we live. So it's others, not just us, that would be at a loss if PGE were allowed to go forward with this project. I thank you for this time, and I hope that you will vote no on approving this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reddick. Jerry Dick is back. Ms. Dick?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much better.
Okay, I had one
Ms.
question.
Dick, we're going to start the timer again, and can you just state your name again, just so we make sure everything's on the record?
Jerry Dick, I live at 22720 Southwest Stafford Road.
Thank you.
And my concern are the power poles. I have 3 of those. And one is very, very close to my house, or they're all pretty close to my house and property line. But this one is on the hill, and the power is going to just go right over top of my head. And I have a feeling they're going to have to take that easement that they want to give me 30 feet in to be able to even put a power pole on there. I have metal buildings. I've got two barns that are metal. At the small barn, they're going to be right up against the barn door practically. And so I am worried about the electricity. I'm afraid of fire. And also, I am 85 and I would have to move because of I wouldn't want to be here with my health with the currents going through and over my head. So anyway, I'm very concerned about all of this. And if you can give me any help or figure out if the easements are going to actually go into effect, I'd like to know that. So anyway, that's what my concerns are. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dick, and thank you for dealing with the technology issues. I appreciate that it worked.
Okay, thanks.
Alma Molina. You'll need to unmute yourself. It still shows as muted. We're not hearing you yet. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, my first concern is safety.
Can I get you to state your name for the record, ma'am?
My name is Alma Molina, and I live in 19830 Southwest Stafford Road. My first thing is safety. I had a pole about 20 feet about my porch. Safety is my first concern because we don't have firefighter station around here. And yeah, so high volume power around here, it's very dangerous. And I hope you guys consider that. I have kid and harming my kid and a lot of people around here. I hope you guys both know in this, consider safety for a lot of people around here, elders, kid. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Ms. Molina. Joey Ernest. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
That's correct. Can you hear me?
Yep.
My name's Joey Ernest. I live at 24805 Southwest Gage Road. It backs to Stafford Road, the back of the property. I just want to bring up one specific concern and a request that that you all look into the master planning for City of Wilsonville, unincorporated Washington County, unincorporated Clackamas County. I will add that I'm a civil engineer. I have my PE in water resources, and there are projects that are either have been built or planned. The Beckman Road project, as well as the roundabout at Alexander 65th and Stafford Road. And I would ask if there are public capital improvement projects either planned or completed along Beckman Road to install a water transmission main down Stafford Road with hydrants, because that's the biggest concern. There's no fire hydrants in my opinion, there's no fire hydrants along Stafford Road. Others have brought up the concern of fire hazard, fire risk. And if those projects did not have a water component and they're not bringing a 12-inch ductile iron main or 12-inch C900 PVC water main from the public infrastructure along Alexander and through Beckman, and if there's not a plan for a water main to be routed along Stafford Road, then that is a huge concern. There should be fire hydrants at 500 foot on center along Stafford Road with the proposed high voltage lines, and that should already be in place before the high voltage lines are installed. And if that's not even on the water master plan for these cities or for the counties, then that reason alone should be grounds to deny the application.
Thank you, Mr. Ernest. Is there anybody else who'd like to testify who hasn't had the opportunity to do so? See, Keith, I don't have a last name. You're muted. There we go.
Keith Okerstrom, 24720 Southwest Stafford Road.
And can you spell your last name, sir?
Okerstrom.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Thank you. First, I'd like to second Mr. Ernest's request for fire hydrants and a master plan. Secondly, I'd speak to safety in terms of traffic. What I've seen is that the project is a 1 to 2 year construction project. Currently, we have very little choices on egress. Stafford Road, where I live, there are no alternative routes aside from turning left or right out of my driveway. That's the only way out. When we've had ice storms and snowstorms and downed trees, when we've had days like Thanksgiving where traffic, we have traffic leaving the metro area, Stafford Road becomes blocked with traffic. It's a standstill. So if you pair that with a massive transmission line through a scenic byway that's already overburdened during natural disaster, such as storms and such as traffic movement on holidays, I suppose I either will not be able to get home or I won't be able to leave my home. Fortunately, I'm middle-aged and we can stay at home for a little bit, but I know that there are a lot of older folks that live on Stafford Road. And sometimes children are left, that are old enough to be at home by themselves are at home along Stafford Road, where there's also bus lines. So the impact of safety on traffic flow and egress out of the Stafford Road area, especially if there wasn't the water available in case of a fire, very significant. I don't know if I could sleep at night being a planner and knowing that people were stuck in their homes during disaster and high traffic flow. We already can't leave our homes when traffic is at a standstill. So with construction crews bringing down 60-foot poles and then erecting 125-foot steel poles with distribution and transmission lines, creating a very disturbing non-agricultural advantage. Our safety is of high concern. I want to thank the county for putting double yellow stripes down Stafford a few years back. I think that has saved some lives. So good job there.
Mr. Okerstrom.
Yeah.
If you want to add anything further, you can do that in writing.
Will do. Thank you so much.
Is there anyone else who'd like to testify who hadn't had the opportunity? Okay, not seeing anybody. Anything further from the county? Ms. Fields?
I wanted to bring up the non-conforming use application Z0313-25. It has been mentioned in testimony today that application and decision is not final yet. The decision of denial has been appealed. There are a couple of appellants, including the applicant and Save Stafford Road. So that decision is not final yet.
Is that subject to appeal to the hearings officer? One of
Yes.
the hearings? Because I'm one of two in the county, so just for everybody else. Okay, thank you. I appreciate the heads up on that. And the number will allow me to find it on the county's website. So anything
The
further?
number is also mentioned in the staff report.
Thanks. Anything further from the county? Okay. The applicant's opportunity, who wants to go first? And I think there were 4.5 minutes left on the applicant's timer. Can we reset that as well?
As a preliminary matter, can you hear us all right?
Yes.
Hearings officer. As a preliminary matter, applicant agrees with Mr. Hathaway that a traditional 777 period to leave the record open.
I'm sorry, can I get your name? You weren't on the video before. I'm not sure who's who.
Will Rasmussen, Miller
Thank you,
National
Mr.
Land Use
Rasmussen. Thank you.
we agree that the 777 approach would be good for this case. I'm just going to hit on 3 issues really quick. What Ms. Fields was just talking about, the non-conforming use application that was quoted by several opponents. I'm glad you asked for a copy of that. What you'll see in it is that it has different approval criteria as it relates to impact on neighbors. It applies a no greater adverse impact standard, which is a much different and much higher standard than the present case. Also, the facts are slightly different. Applicant updated its materials to show less tree removal that we were able to figure out from additional study. Second issue I want to hit on regarding testimony from Mr. Wagner, Ms. Braun, Mr. Yap, regarding concern about health impacts from electric fields. I'd like to point the hearings officer to applicant exhibit Q2 in the record, a report on electric and magnetic fields by CH2M Hill that specifically studies this application and finds minimal impacts to EMF levels on the ground and no documented health concerns here. Also point out that this neighborhood has transmission lines on it on Stafford, and is in fact bisected by a much larger 500 kilovolt line of BPA lines that crosses the proposed lines and also crosses Mountain Road, which is also a rural scenic road in this area. Lastly, several opponents testified about the impact to the natural beauty of the area. One referenced Z0313-25 in the RRFF5 zone. That calls generally for the county to conserve the natural scenic beauty of the county. That is a classic example of an aspirational statement in the zoning code and comprehensive plan that opponents try to turn into an approval criterion. I'm going to pass it to Ben Schonberger briefly with the rest of our time.
Ben Schonberger from Winterbrook Planning testified earlier. So just a couple of points to touch on in rebuttal. There was in the main slide presentation from Greg Hathaway and Mr. Wagner showing some visuals. And those were basically the PGE's photo simulation visuals from the previous non-conforming use alteration case. Those were not submitted as part of this. We have updated and refined those visuals that show less tree removal and different appearances. I think it's important to point out from a visual information standpoint that those visuals have been manipulated and they cropped the kind of most apparent pole locations within those visuals. And I think that is not accurate because when assessing the visual impact of this, we need to take the new poles and new wires in context. And so there's no specific how far away from a pole you should stand to do a photostimulation or how close to it you should stand, or if you should just turn the other direction and look away from the poles. So our submittals in the new current application show those poles and lines in a reasonable context along the road. And I don't think it's accurate to zoom in and close to a pole itself and say, look at what a dramatic change this is. And whether it's a minor change or a major change, that was raised as well, I think depends on the proximity to the new facility and the visual perspective. And so if we're going to talk about a very large surrounding area to encompass the most potentially affected people, then we should also have the benefit of imagining what these poles would look like from the outer limits of that area, which is a half a mile away, as well as from properties that are right next to it. Last point on both the health impacts and property value impacts, if you want to bother to dig into the science of this and the journal articles, most of them, or virtually all of them, talk about high voltage power lines. And if you read closely that these are typically 350 or 500 kilovolt power lines, and the assessments, which are in most of this literature very small, are from the kind of power lines that we are not proposing as part of this project. These are the 115 kilovolt power line, many of which are all over the county already. So to conclude that it causes health impacts or property value reduction based on studies that are for an entirely different kind of development is also not entirely accurate. So that's our rebuttal. And if there are other questions for us directly, just let us know. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to close the hearing. I'm going to hold the record open as requested for a total of 3 weeks. Let me grab my calendar. Sorry, I don't recall the name offhand, but one gentleman requested potential additional time for the Historic Preservation Office comments. This application has been ongoing for considerable time, and everybody's had the opportunity to review it and consider those issues, so I'm not going to extend the record for that purpose. I will just hold it over a total of 3 weeks, for 1 week until October 2nd, for anybody to submit additional written testimony and evidence regarding any issues. Anything you want to submit has to be physically received by the county by 4 p.m. You can send it to Ms. Fields at her email. You can deliver it. You can mail it. If you mail it, you need to make sure there's time to make it to the county by 4 p.m. on the 3rd of October. I'll hold it open until October 9th for anybody to respond to whatever was submitted during the first week. So no new issues can be raised during the second period by October 9th. Only response to issues raised during the first open record period and new evidence submitted during that. And then until October 16th for the applicant alone to submit a final written argument without any new evidence. The applicant can waive that right or submit their final argument early, and I'll close the record upon submittal. But regardless, I'll close it by the 16th of October. I will do my best to get my decision out by October 30th, 2 weeks after the close of the record. I will send my decision to the county. The county will send it to parties of record. So anybody who has testified orally or in writing, or who does so in writing during the open record, will be sure and receive a copy of my decision. As Ms. Fields noted, if you don't want to testify but want a copy, you can contact her. She'll put you on the mailing list as well. Just provide email or mailing address so she can send you the copy of the decision. But as I noted, anything that anybody wants to submit has to be physically received by the county by 4 p.m. on the 9th for the first period, the 2nd for the 1st of October for the first period, the 9th of October for responses, the 16th of October for the applicant alone for final argument. That concludes our hearing. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.